Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's program. Many of you who are joining us today come from the planning community or have planned a meeting, an event in your life. And so you can understand the situation that we, as the presenters and speakers for today's program, encountered. I just learned this morning of a movement called The Show Must Be Paused and Blackout Tuesday. And I want to recognize that. I want to recognize our support with this, with the peaceful demonstrations, with the solidarity movements that are going on. But the reason that we chose to go on with this particular show is because you, our audience, are planners. And in my entire career in this industry, when I walked into a room or arrived in a city or worked in any kind of destination, the very first questions that I asked were about what couldn't be done, what were the guidelines, what is the risk involved. Now I'm here as a producer of this program, but I'm also here wearing my planner hat. I'm also here as the daughter of a New York City detective, where I was taught not to be afraid, but to be aware and to know the facts. Planners are not party planners. And planners have spent their lives being concerned about risk management first. Risk management of every stakeholder. The attendees, the speakers, the VIPs, senior executives, your crew, your production team, your staff. Safety and security has always been the priority, no matter what color linen is on the table. And so I and the speakers who are joining me today, we're torn, but committed to giving you a program that you signed up for as best as we can. And so thank you for joining us today, because this risk management world that we live in, this duty of care, is our duty first. It's our responsibility as people moving forward. So, duty of care, risk management, security, safety encompasses so much of what you will learn and hear about today. One of our speakers, Mark Caruango, has chosen not to participate. His company is recognizing the movement, but Mark will be back and give you the information that he promised, and I promised you that. So we'll hear about legal and insurance, threat and risk assessments, professional security services, and so much more that hopefully can help you in your planning responsibilities move on to what Jim Spellows reminded me in this hybrid age that we live in, where our physical and our digital lives connect more than ever. So I want to thank you to the sponsors, as always, Meeting Jobs and Dawn Penfold, meeting you, Jim Spellows. Not only is Jim a speaker today, but he co-hosts these events with me. He's a colleague, a friend, and an expert in technology. So thank you, Jim. Meeting Evolution, Rob Wilson, Women's Leadership Exchange, Andrea March, and the Hard Rock Hotel in Atlantic City. We also support different foundations such as the Above and Beyond Foundation, Search Foundation, and Rock and Wrap It Up. The link for today's program will be made available for the week following. We will send you an email, and we will also be including a resource guide and information that's pertinent to today's program with some of the speakers' PowerPoints in their decks. I also want to thank Harvey Grotsky and Coastal Communications Corporation. Harvey and his team have been dedicated through this whole COVID crisis, and now moving on to the security crisis. They publish corporate and incentive travel, association conventions and facilities, and insurance and financial meetings management. Their online presence is also informative to the planning community and will continue to do so. During today's event, we'll have a chat room, and we're going to actually shift our agenda somewhat so that you have more participation in the program. And we look forward to your questions and concerns for all of our speakers as we open that up and move it to your access. Jim will be helping to moderate these, and our speakers will be joining again. So, you know, look, I have a cartoon on my desk. It's a person looking at a gigantic library, and the person next to him says, in the beginning, there just used to be 10 commandments. So here to decipher the law for us and give us some semblance of sanity in that area is Jonathan Howe, co-founder of Howe and Hutton. Thank you, John. Jonathan consistently brings us his expertise up to the minute from a legal viewpoint on everything from contracts and what's happening in today's world. Jonathan is joined today by Terry Wooden, Terry with an I. Terry is the Vice President of Marketing and Global Meeting Services for Meeting Sites Resource, a premier site selection company owned by Jennifer Brown. Jonathan and Terry, thank you for being here. To add a different perspective and to speak from his heart is my friend and colleague and industry leader, Wayne Robinson. Wayne has dual experience in management and the planning role and being a leader in the industry, a former chair of Financial and Insurance Conference Planners Organization. A special welcome to Ed Cannon, Vice President of Security Consulting Services from T&M Protection Resources, Ed, and Courtney Klein, who's also joining us today with Ed from T&M Consulting Services. They will be discussing threat and risk assessments, which we thought was critical for all of you to hear, amongst the other information. The event wouldn't be complete without Jim Spellows, and Jim will give us his tips on internet security. Jim, I'd be interested to see hear what your perspective is. Thank you very much for joining us. Jen Slaw is an expert juggler, but she is a speaker from her heart. And Jen will speak to us today on what it's like to be nimble during trying times. So thank you, Jen. I want to give a shout out and thank you to T. Scorman Productions. We made a decision today to postpone our music and open that time up for you for chat and to recognize what's going on. But I do want to thank Acoustic Joe and T. Scorman, and I promise you they'll be back because they're fantastic. And we all need a little music sometimes as medicine. So just to move on with our program, I want to say thank you again for being here. Thank you all for what you do. Thank you for the responsibility that you hold. And let's get started. So, Jonathan and Terry.
Thank you, Diane, very much. I made the self-declaration a little bit earlier this morning to Diane and the crew before we assembled for this program that I don't prepare my material until the night before. And the reason I do that is because everything changes. Who would have thought a week and a half ago we would be facing the kind of thing we are facing now with the riots in the street and with the breakdown of civility in a lot of areas of our country. And in fact, now it's advanced itself throughout the world. We're seeing demonstrations in Europe. We're seeing demonstrations all over the planet relative to this terrible thing that occurred in Minneapolis a little bit of a week ago. My concern then becomes, what do I do? Well, I look over my left shoulder and I see my TV screen, and I just see an item about restoring law and order. I see a TV screen that the governor of New York blames the mayor of New York City for not keeping control. We see all kinds of uprising and concern overall. At least twice a week, I conduct a program with all the members of my firm to discuss what's going on, what their feelings are. And the question I asked them this morning is, how many of you are prepared to travel to go to a client event, a client board meeting, whatever it might be. And there was a lot of reluctance. There was a lot of concern. And basically, the consensus was it will really depend on the circumstances that exist at the time I may have to make that decision. I may pack my bag on a Monday night, wake up on a Tuesday morning to go to the airport, but I look at the news and suddenly my whole perspective has changed. That's what we're up against right now in this whole area of risk management. So much of what is going to be dependent here is personal choice. And so I believe that one of the key elements that's so important right now is you feel for what you are going to do, your own self-evaluation as to what's important. Then equate that and ask yourself, what are the people who I'm hoping are going to come to my program going to do? They have the same feeling that I do. If I'm an association member, I know that going to that association membership meeting or whatever is not mandatory, it's discretionary. If I'm a corporate staff employee, I know pretty much so that I'm going to have to go to that corporate meeting unless the boss has a feeling that really we shouldn't hold that meeting. So a lot of this is going to be last minute determination, but more importantly, it's going to be risk management at a personal point of view. And I would welcome what Terry has to say, especially from her standpoint of being somebody who's trying to put together programs, meetings, events, and make them fit.
Thank you, Jonathan. So over the past few weeks, I've been working with my clients to take a look back at what worked and what didn't. Were they really prepared for a pandemic? We've spent a number of years focusing on safety security for all the reasons that we're aware of, but not an illness or a pandemic. And as a meeting planner, we're the trusted advisor to our stakeholders. They expect us to lead, research, and provide information, recommend next steps, and inform everybody for constant communication. So yesterday I was on a call with a couple of my clients, and they said, what are you using to decide if meetings should happen and should we attend? And really, you have to do the duty of research of the venue, the city, destination, what is happening, what are their guidelines, mandates, what are the ages of your attendees for different meetings? Do they fall into a category that is more at risk? And then what is the business purpose? What is your frustration of purpose of being able to attend, to define what that looks like? And duty of care on your part as the planner, bringing your attendees there, but as well as the duty of the care of the hotels. One hotel yesterday asked me, is our client ready to come in the fall? And like Jonathan said, it's too early to answer that question because right now the hotel is closed. And are they going to be functioning? And what is the city guidelines going to be? So really doing that duty of care standards of researching, informing, planning, and recommending, having a risk management strategy that runs through a number of different key topics. And most importantly, as a planner, how do these safety things affect our budgets? And typically you hear that safety costs 5 to 10% of your budget. And then how does it affect budget in other areas of how we deliver food now, how we provide a hybrid meeting because a ballroom can't seat everybody, so we have to then go virtual with half the meetings. So there's a lot of things to consider. I welcome everybody's questions on what I'm working on a daily basis, but that would be my introduction from a risk and duty of care standpoint of what I'm dealing with right now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Terry. John, I'm sure you've been seeing or hearing about a lot of the same topics, and how are you giving people advice with that?
Well, you know, legal advice right now is in a state of flux as well, because one of the things that we're concerned about is we want to look at this, and I've said this on previous programs as well, is not a win-win type of situation with those with whom we're working, our attendees, the publics we serve, and we are now concerned with the safety, the health, and the emotional well-being of people who are going to be depending upon us to make a certain call. One of the things that we are doing with clients is saying, look, let's postpone any kind of decision that has to be made until the point of where a decision has to be made. What do I mean by that? I mean, you look at your contracts, you look at what you're anticipating, you look at what Terry just indicated. You know, we're going to reduce the number of sleeping rooms, and we're going to increase the amount of space that we're going to need to conduct meetings and programs. We're going to have social distancing. I think this is one thing I can safely predict for quite a while. There are going to be people who are going to insist upon it. We're going to have, with all of the various safety and health codes that are being promoted by groups like the WTTC, American Hotel and Lodging Association, and the like. We're looking for what are the venues that we're going to be relying on, what are their assurances as to what they're doing. Then we have to ask ourselves, from the standpoint, from your own personal viewpoint, are those assurances sufficient for you to make a decision that you're prepared to go? So a lot of what we're going to be looking at, Dianne, is what is the other side saying they're going to provide. By other side, I mean the people we rely on to help us pull off the successful event. That's all we want to do, pull off the successful event. But there are a couple of subcategories on that successful event. I'm safe. I am not going to get sick. I'm not going to encounter some kind of other problem that's known or unknown at the time. Back to that duty of care. But we all also have that self-imposed duty of care. If I decide to go to the meeting, have I assumed the liabilities, knowing what we know today relative to our participation? So we want to be very careful. We want to be very circumspect. But we also always want to look at it from the standpoint of what would I do in those circumstances, and will I expect reasonably that my attendees would do the same?
Right. Well, John, you know, I mean, too, and then just what is so important in a contract? I mean, the last time you were on one of these events with me, and you've been one of the supporters, is we spoke about, okay, we're dealing with the pandemic, which we still are, right? In terms of clauses and what gets covered in there. Now, in the past, from the terrorism threats, we put in impossibility or improbability clauses, or, you know, going by the red, orange, yellow code. I mean, what's going to change, you know? And from Terry's point of view, what does she tell a customer? How does that work? John, can you give us some insight on that?
Sure. Let me make this observation. Before, we were relying upon whether we had a communicable disease clause in our contract for force majeure. Well, for better or worse, we now have a second clause that we need to be concerned about, and that is we're looking. Oh, shoot. I guess we got. Sorry about that. But what we're looking at now is a second aspect. Before, we were trying to rely on force majeure for COVID. Now we have a whole different aspect that we've added to the program. That's now public disobedience, rioting, civil disobedience, and the like. So the game has changed a little bit because of what's been happening with the riots. And it is peaceful protest, but unfortunately, when the COVID aspect is now a little bit overwhelmed by this, we have that other consideration to come into play. So what we're looking at in our clauses today is we're trying to expand as to the availability of reasons for us to be able to cancel without liability or to negotiate alternatives relative to the potential liability. But more importantly, on both sides, all sides of the question, what is going to be in the best interest of the safety and health of those people who are going to be dependent upon us as to what we're planning. But again,
John, I see that we have lots of questions coming in. So let me just shoot some of these. I would like to hear about the hotel venue's liability if attendees get sick. Well, this is a COVID question. Would like to hear about the hotel venue's liability if attendees get sick and there is a COVID-19 outbreak. Has that been legally determined where liability lies or doesn't?
Well, it's not been determined. It's going to be, from a plaintiff's point of view, if you're a lawyer, you're now going to have to show that by virtue of that person going to the meeting, they came down with whatever it might be. The other part of the thing is if the hotel has subscribed to all of the various safety and health standards that are being promulgated, has met what the CDC has required, has done everything else, well, more than likely, that person could have picked up the disease on their way to the meeting. They could have gotten it at the airport. They could have gotten it from the valet parking assistant. So the burden of proof is going to be relatively substantial. Some properties have come out with a requirement that if you show up and you go and utilize my services, you're waiving your rights to any kind of liability claim because you have assumed that by participating. That's going to be a major throw also for people to overcome. I think the premises liability, etc. Now, if I'm corporate and I'm told by my boss I absolutely positively have to go to that meeting, damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead, I'll probably have a claim, but that claim is not going to be for liability there. It's going to be a workers' compensation claim. And so you have a whole different area of liability that may come into play depending upon the circumstances. So all of these.
Right. John, I don't know if we're having a little issue with your sound, but Terry, can you hear me?
Driven,
yep.
Going to be driven by what you can prove, which is the most important factor.
Yeah, Terry, I'm going to shift to you because I know you brought an article to my attention last night because John is thinking about, okay, you're at the meeting, and I do have another couple of questions coming in, but how about the article where it starts at the airport, doesn't it? So people will be screened at an airport. How much proof will we need to show that we've been tested and gone through a smart machine? And Terry, do you want to speak a little bit about that or comment what John just said? Terry, we can't, no sound, Terry. John, did you see the article about, oh, there you go. All right, there we go.
I switched to my headset, but it didn't work. So hopefully you can hear me.
Thank you.
That's our duty to research as planners. And currently I'm working with some of my clients on getting information from the city CVBs, who are an incredible resource to us on what is happening in their cities and with their airports. What have they modified? What have they changed? So from the point that that meeting attendee's plane lands and they have to exit that plane, what happens with their luggage? Has anybody touched anything? Have passengers touched each other? What do they touch all the way out of the airport? And I think John alluded to this, that they can set up all the things, but what is the individual person's responsibility to be good fellow citizen and meeting attendee? And that's bring your wipes. You can now bring up to 12 ounces of Perel on through security. So are you taking the precautions as a good attendee? And then the biggest part is our duty to inform. So as we communicate often, have it on our websites, have it sent out to meeting attendees and everybody involved in the program, so that they know what's happening in the city that they're going to. Maybe Lyft and Uber hasn't come back yet. What are their transportation options? What has the planner done to help get transportation from the airport to the hotel if they can't arrive individually? And all of that informing is a really big part of what we need to do. And most importantly, the more you communicate and the more you inform, it makes sure attendees feel comfortable to attend.
Yes. Now here's one, and John, think about this too, is from one of our attendees. My concern is how much responsibility should the trade association take on? What Terry was saying, does the attendee have a certain responsibility for themselves? And we can try to offer a clean and safe environment, but how much more are we expected to do? Do you think this will lead to sort of a checklist? And just to what Terry was saying, like a disclaimer to sign? I don't know.
Well, let me put it this way. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink the water. And so no matter how many warnings, how many things you put out there in front of them, they may or may not abide by. Let's assume your association, your corporation says, thou shalt always maintain 6 feet away from anybody else. When was the last time you were at a cocktail party when the bar opened and you were the first ones in the room, that there was not a mob at the bar? Are you going to be paced 6 feet away on both sides, all sides? Draw that circle around you as to that 6-foot halo that people have to maintain. So am I going to be able to prove if I go to a court of law, well, I always maintained that 6 feet. I always a good citizen. I wore my mask. My mask was one of those masks which guaranteed that stuff would not. Yeah, there is a deal of being self-responsible. And I think we assume risk. If I go to the grocery store early on a Saturday morning, have my mask on, sanitize the grocery cart, walk through, pick up my packages, and leave the grocery store through a self-checkout, and I key in my number, do I know whether or not that keyboard has been signed? I don't. But I made the assumption of liability because I don't have gloves on, that when I touch that, and if I had gloves on, I probably couldn't put it in if it's a face value. I'm going to come on. I think we got to get over this idea of shifting liability upon something that you have assumed. I think we have to look at, have we done everything to make sure from that duty of care that we're using a hotel that has subscribed to, is certified to provide the adequate sanitation and other requirements that the organization has subscribed to through some of the agencies, the associations, the WTTC, the CDC, all of those things. I think that becomes a real issue. I would not look at this as that if I'm an association, I'm a guarantor of your health and safety. Anymore, prior to this, I was a guarantor of your health and safety.
Right, right. I mean, if the stove is hot and yeah, if the stove is hot and you touch it, I did what I could, and I,
well, you know the old adage, Diane. If a cat sits on a hot stove, that cat is not going to sit on a cold stove either. It gets out of the stove sitting business.
That's true. So here's a couple more. Liability is going to differ depending on whether it is a trade association sponsored event versus a corporate event. I think everyone should sign a waiver. It's so difficult to figure out how someone may have been in contact with the virus. Can we enforce that, John? Terry, what do you think?
Well, here's why. I mean, waivers, it's what we call an assumed consent and an assumed knowledge and assumed information that we know what liability we are assuming and that we're willing to take that on. I'm a skier, and I would go, when I buy my lift ticket, there's a little sign over the ski tow booth that says, hey guy, skiing can be dangerous to your health. You may fall down, you may break a bone, you may run into a tree may run into you. You might even die. Have a nice day and enjoy the slopes. I mean, by virtue of issues that are provided by state law where ski resorts are, that will stand up. Will that stand up in this kind of situation? Let's stay tuned and see what the courts decide. But when I walk in and I am told that, and I mean, has anybody been able to turn on TV, a radio, or anything, pick up a newspaper, that there's not a warning about COVID? There's not a warning about walking in the streets after curfew? Come on, let's be real. There are things out there that I have assumed, and if I decide to do it, then that's on me. I'm not so concerned about that individual liability as I am about assuring or trying to give somewhat relative picture of telling people what they can assume is going to be the situation when they get to the hotel. Let me see, if I'm a meeting planner from the hotel or the convention center, how are you going to set up that bar to be able to have people? How are you going to be able to set that table so that I can keep 6 feet apart when we have a dinner? I know I'm not going to do a buffet. I know I'm going to do things which are limited touch. I'm going to do everything in my power to try to give people an assurance that if you come to my meeting and you use your own reasonable, good judgment, that you're going to be okay. But you still, that's an individual decision on your part.
Right. So basically, the host or the meeting planner, you do as much as you can within the knowledge that you have up to that moment to provide that safe and secure environment. And then, like everything else, it's an indemnification issue in a sense of what happens to that person.
Well,
is that what you're thinking, John?
Too. If the hotel tells me that they're going to be sanitizing all of the public space at least every 3 hours, one of the things I'm going to insist on is that that be put in the contract. I want to know what you're doing. And then if you breach that warranty, then I'm going to have that shifting of liability to you. And I'm also going to have a nice discussion with you when we go through the master account.
Yeah. A couple questions before we wrap up our time.
Diane, can I mention something really
Please.
quick?
Yes,
So
please, Terry.
I've been following the duty of care rules for a long time. I spent 30 years on the hotel side before I became a planner 8 years ago. And at the Meetings Industry Council, which is the MIC conference that's held in Colorado every spring, that was literally days before everything shut down. And I was in the stadium at the Nuggets basketball game, completely sold out. And we were at the MIC conference, and then all of a sudden everything closed. But I would love to give a shout out to one of the sessions that I attended there, which Brenda Rivers did. And I see a comment in the group chat that she's actually on today. But for people that need additional, because I'm at a very high level with it, and she does this every day, Brenda Rivers can be reached at brivers@safellc.com. And for any planners on the line that really need to dig deep on the duty of care part of it and your role as a planner, she is a fantastic resource.
Right. And Terry, you'll also be hearing from T&M Protection Resources and other people we have on. Everyone will hear today. So it's good. What I hear is that there are a lot of people involved in duty and care, and that makes me feel good. So let's see. We have a couple more questions here. Moving on. What are your thoughts on contact tracing? Should it come to our attention that someone had symptoms during the event or shows them soon after leaving the event? How do you communicate that to everyone that was there? John, you want to try that one?
Well, I wish I could come up with an answer to that, but we have all kinds of issues of privacy. We have issues overall. We have a lot of states right now which are employing people to do contact tracing. We know that Google and Apple were looking at ways by which, if your cell phone or whatever, if you were the person who comes down with it, you would then have a contact overall that would come up, that you would be told that you were near somebody at a time that they have tested positive or whatever. I think that the whole thing of contact tracing is a next step that's going to be important, because let's face it, if you go to an event and there's one person there and you come in contact with that one person, you go out and walk the street, go to the grocery store, get on an airplane, well, there are 10 people around you. Now you've hit 10 more people. So it has that mushroom effect of carrying out. So I think contact tracing is going to be important, and it's going to be one way by which we help to stem this by, again, getting those 10 people that you may have come in contact with so that they self-quarantine and don't infect anybody else, because it's just that multiple thing. It's that kind of thing. How successful will it be? We're about to find out, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And so I think, just for today, and we have a couple minutes just for a closing statement on the subject of what planners should be adding to their list of responsibilities from a legal point of view, from a contract point of view, how to communicate, given the due diligence that we're responsible for. John, what would you, leave with your 1 minute?
Well, as I started this is a question of you doing your own self-evaluation. What is it that you're going to require for yourself to feel safe, to feel that you want to participate in that program? And then how much liability, how much risk are you willing to assume? In making that determination, in no small part, you're going to look at the venue, you're going to look at the sponsor of the program as to what they're trying to do to make you feel comfortable. Then you have to ask yourself, have they assured me with a comfortability level that I'm prepared to go? So it might be that the venue has done that, but your transportation mode, you're not secure with.
Right. Very good point, John, because all of the companies, it's almost, and it's a good segue into insurance, is having the assurance from everyone on your team that you're all following the rule. Terry, do you have one last statement on contracts and responsibilities and how you would want to communicate with your clients?
I would really say it's watching the city, county, and state bans and mandates. And as we grow, hopefully in reverse, we're going to see meetings of 10, meetings of up to 50, meetings of up to 100. Keeping in touch with the CVBs and the cities that you're going to and communicating that to your stakeholders so that you can make that go, no-go decision on the meeting. And very often it doesn't happen until within 30 days. And a lot of stakeholders get eager and want to do something sooner. But if you're evaluating your attendees that want to have the meeting and the purpose of the meeting to be delivered, it's really communicating that and keeping in touch with everybody in the place that you're going.
All right. Yes. Thank you. So thank you. So we live in a tenuous time. Legal is always important. Communicating with customers and keeping up to date with the most current information that we can share with one another is and always will be our ultimate responsibility, doing the right thing as much as we can. So thank you,
One
John.
last comment. Yeah, one last
John.
comment I'd like to make
Sure.
is there is a legal issue and there's a practical issue. Right now, the legal issue should take second place as to what is the practical, pragmatic, and realistic result that you're trying to obtain. The legal, I can help you with. We can work that through. But more importantly, even if you have the law on your side, is it still the right thing to do?
Yeah, and just one more comment here that we just received in before we move on to Wayne is my company is requiring self-quarantine for 14 days after returning from any sort of travel. Business travel is banned.
By the way, I have that rule in effect for my office that if you do international travel and you come back, you're going to do 14 days of quarantine. Same with domestic travel as it stands right now. So I think that's a pragmatic approach. If you're in a challenge class of being over 60, depending on where you live, you may have an apartment building. If you're in a senior living type of environment over 55, you're probably going to face the same kind of restrictions as to what's going on. And certainly for most offices, now a temperature check may be required before you can enter the building even, or before you can even get to your office. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that being self-imposed by the employer, association, corporate, whatever, or even in smaller situations, as just protection. Remember, this is a two-way street. You can be one of those people who carries the disease, or you can be one of those people who's going to be susceptible to the disease.
Thank you, John, as always. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate your both being here. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and questions. So moving on with our program, I'd like to welcome my friend and colleague, Wayne Robinson. Wayne is the Assistant VP with FM Global and the past chair of the Financial and Insurance Conference Planners Association. Other than that, he's my friend. Wayne, thank you so much for being here. And we heard some things from Jonathan and Terry's session, you know, with legal responsibility contracts that really feeds into insurance in a way, huh? Insurance. And so I just, before you get started, do you have any thoughts on what they commented on? I know John will chime in when he feels like it, because that's what he does. But do you have any thoughts on what they covered before we move on?
Well, nothing specifically, Diane. And again, thank you for asking me or inviting me to be involved. I want to also thank you for, in the beginning of this podcast, to illustrate or share light or bring light to exactly what's going on socially right now. And I think it's ever so important in the memory of this gentleman, George Floyd, who lost his life senselessly. And I think it's good for us all to take a step back and take a look at what we're doing, what we can do to influence social change. I think it's so important at a time like this, because we have so many other various challenges that we're faced with at this point in time. So I thank you for illustrating that. And I hope everyone is safe and smart about anything we do in regards to the future.
Thank you, Wayne.
To talk a little bit about insurance specifically, it's so ironic because in the title, it talked about financial and insurance, and we're kind of tied because most, obviously, insurance companies, especially personal lines, are very much tied to investment product and the like. So, and then insurance as a whole is such a broad spectrum, but risk management is something that we're all, regardless of whatever business or line of business we're in, is first and foremost and most important right now for continued success. So that being said, I sat up last night. I'm not as smart as John Howe, so I sat up and I put together a little 7-page PowerPoint, the whole 9 yards. And I'm gonna, and Diane, I shared with that. I sent my latest iteration to you this morning. By all means, anybody wants it, please share it with anyone who would request that. But I'm gonna put that aside right now. I'm gonna talk a little bit about current times, because between last night and today, things have changed in some way, in some respect. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenges, and the challenges in risk management are universal, not just to insurance of any kind. I work for a commercial property insurance company, but also personal lines, also any line of business, telecommunications or banking or anything. Risk management is apropos for, especially at this time, for all lines of business, including mom and pop shops. It doesn't matter. Some of the challenges are universal. Disruption due to social distancing, plummeting employee productivity. Some people are hourly wage workers. They can't work from home. They don't have that luxury. Others, it's just not impossible for them to do that. Stress supply chains, recession, unemployment, and investment. Economic instability and civil unrest, and also mitigation strategies. And again, I put a lot of information specific to that in my deck, but I want to move on and talk a little bit about, I think Terry and John opened the door to talk about our industry specific, especially to the planners and professionals, meeting professionals that are on the line, because I wear 2 hats. One is past chair of FICP. I plan the annual meeting to be held in November. And also, too, I have a team of meeting professionals that we manage probably about 130 meetings per annum, and many of which are going to take place in the 4th quarter. And some we already canceled, as you can imagine. So it's a very challenging time for all of us. I want to talk and spend this little bit of time talking about some of the things that the level of expectation that our companies right now have placed upon us to kind of guide them. And what are some of the things that we have to kind of talk to them about in order to get back to the new normal, or as John would say, the new reality, because that's what it is. This is going to be our new reality. It's not something that's going to happen and go away and we're going to be able to move back to the way things were always done. That's just not going to happen. So some of the things that came to mind were, following the government and regulatory guidelines. I mean, that's going to really play a big part in what we can do moving forward for meetings and events, where they're going to be held. It could be state by state, destination by destination. I mean, these are things that are really going to affect not only our planning internally, how to manage these processes and put them in place, but or the hotels or venues. But it's also kind of going to drive exactly what we can and cannot do, where we can and cannot go. The who, what, where, and how. I mean, we do a lot of client meetings, for example. I mean, they have their individual travel policies. They're going to be affected. That will affect whether or not they can even come to the meeting. And if that be the case, is there going to be a hybrid approach? Are we going to have virtual meetings moving forward when we're going to go back to face-to-face? Or they're not going to be able to attend? I mean, that's a driving force as to what's going on. So we have to survey and find out, okay, what can you do if we decide to move forward with the meeting and invite you? Who's coming? Who's coming to our meetings? Are they internal meetings? Obviously, they adhere to the travel policy. Again, any government regulations or what have you. Can they travel? Are they able to, state by state? Is that the way it's going to be? Or is it going to be, eventually it's going to be on a federal basis of, what people can and cannot do, where they can and cannot go? I mean, these are all things that we're taking in consideration right now as we begin to try to open up and decide exactly what we can do moving forward. As far as my company is concerned, on June 12th, we determine whether or not we'll move forward with meetings in the fourth quarter, or are we going to transition everything into 2021? Obviously, that's a big step to take because we don't know what's going to happen fourth quarter, or if that be the case, is that going to transition into the first quarter of 2021 when a lot of our meetings are running? And then, of course, all the meetings that are being canceled are now being moved forward into either fourth quarter, 21 or even 22. And so it's a mad rush from a planner perspective. A lot of the companies are moving and pushing everything forward. How is that going to affect us? Is there going to be availability? And then we're not even talking about specs, because the specs are going to really pretty much determine where we're going.
Well, Wayne, can I just interrupt you for a moment there? And John, I want you to think about this one too, because this came up before, and I think more than ever now, is the concept of a cancellation clause over the force majeure clause over now, the improbability. So what, from an insurance point of view and a legal point of view, this is one of the questions is, what do I do? What is the benefits of having these in this time? What do we do legally and from an insurance point of view?
Well, I guess I make a comment. I welcome Wayne's too, because he's right there. What the riots and civil disobedience have done is basically open up a new category in any cancellation insurance policies, disruption or interruption, business interruption policy, to give you a new one. And this is a lot in some respects. If your office building has been boycotted out, burned, whatever, if you're a storekeeper and your building is destroyed, you now have a pretty legitimate, easy to prove type of claim. And from the standpoint of a city that is now in a shutdown, where you can't move anywhere from 9 to 6 in the morning, where they're not letting people in and out of the downtown area unless you're an essential visitor or essential business. For example, in Chicago, if I were going to stay at the Hyatt Regency Chicago, number one, I could not get on the L to get downtown because the L is not going into the loop or business area. If I am a person who's coming from Detroit or New York or anywhere, I'm not going to be able to get in the downtown area. I might be able to by saying, well, I'm a guest of the hotel, but what is the reason for you being there? So it's a whole different ballgame that's come into play because of this new element that none of us wanted to see, but it is a different opportunity. And I hate to use the word opportunity, but that's what it is, for being able to file a claim and go forward.
Yes, and Wayne, I mean, from an insurance point of view, there and where do you put that in a contract, and how do you update contracts that you have now? I mean, is that something you can touch on just for people who are asking that question?
Well, and it's ironic because we're going through that right now, where force majeure is not able to pick up. We have to take a look at some sort of neurovirus clause. But again, a lot of the hotels will tell you, well, Wayne, this can't go on to perpetuity. This is something that we have to put in the context of, well, it's good from here to here. And else we can't honor that because we could potentially put ourselves at risk or risk of cancellation, in basically in theory that this may continue. Look at coronavirus as an example. We can't say what's going to happen 3 months from now any more than we can say what's going to happen, next week. So it's such a fluid situation, and I'm sure, John, you can jump in on that from the legal aspect of it, but it's so fluid that a lot of people are scratching their head about how do we approach this, because it's something that can't rest and reside in every contract for any undistinguished amount of time.
Well, here's another thought, and Wayne is right on. Part of the situation would be that we will put in our contracts that if there is an incident that occurs within 3 months or 2 weeks or whatever of the time for our meeting, we're going to reserve the right to cancel or to postpone or delay or to otherwise renegotiate. Go back to the time of Legionnaire's disease. So the hotel is found to be appropriately able to reopen at the end of Legionnaire's disease, and your meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks after that declaration comes forward. how many of your people want to be the first people in a hotel that has just experienced a Legionnaire's disease? There's the emotional aspect that comes into play. So you want to give yourself a window as to when that's going to be applicable. And by that I mean, you might say if there's a hurricane, well, so let's use Legionnaire, if there's a communicable disease, if there's a riot or there's destruction or civil unrest or anything else that has happened within a period of time before my meeting, let's say 3 months before my meeting or 2 months or 2 weeks, I still reserve the right to cancel without liability or to delay or postpone my program because that occurred within the window that I provided in my contract, allowing me to do that.
How does that relate to insurance, Wayne? And then I'm coming back, John. I have a heated question for you, and then I have one for you, Wayne. But Wayne, what are you thinking with what John just spoke about?
Well, it's pretty much in the same line of we had mentioned. You know, I mean, it's, you know, it has to be for basically a defined period of time. And then it's on a case-by-case basis on top of that. I mean, people are looking at this and saying, well, okay, fine, if we agree to this, you know, what liability are we facing? And then we're talking about hotels. Let's talk about hotels specifically. I mean, they're coming back from an extended period of time where there's little, if any, revenue. So, I mean, there's obviously from the revenue managers and the ownership, there's going to be a big push to say, okay, fine, we got to get back up and running in order to get the doors back open and get people employed and get back on the positive side of the balance sheet. So, you know, again, this is not caused by an economic downturn per se, so much so as a pandemic, you know, which is what's causing this. So it's a pretty fluid situation.
It's a fluid situation. John, just a quick answer to this so we don't, says I'm frustrated. Just for John, just to clarify, did Jonathan say at this time we cannot determine whether we have responsibility to tell other attendees that someone has the virus? We may not know the names of these individuals. We don't want to start a panic. What do we do?
Well, I don't think you have a responsibility that you yourself, your organization, has to do the contact tracing. And part of that becomes, I think, from the standpoint of what government agencies are saying, or if you have a device, if you're willing to have your Apple, your Google, or whatever it's going to be, because I don't know what the technology is. I yield to fellows on this as to being able to make that. But I don't think you have, if you know that somebody came down with COVID at your program or meeting, you might just put out a factor and say, we've been made aware that somebody did come in contact with this. You don't know who that person necessarily is. You don't want to disclose the name of the person. We just had a case here in Chicago or in Cook County where there was an ordinance that was about to be passed that would require that when you're calling 911, that you would have to disclose to the 911 operator whether anybody at that location had been subject to COVID or whatever. The court said, no, you cannot invade their privacy by doing that. There's no obligation on them to disclose whether or not they're there. But if I'm a building manager, I am probably going to have, if I know of cases in my building, I'm going to let the building know, hey, somebody on the 23rd floor came down with COVID. I will tell you, I mentioned the 23rd floor. That's exactly what happened in my building, where my office is, that one of the tenants on our floor had come down with COVID. The building management notified everybody on the 23rd floor that there had been a reported case, and that was it. I mean, we were made aware of the fact, but we were not made aware of who that person was, since it was with a different person. They said at the time that person had been in the building. So if you had been in the building the same time that individual was, or shortly thereafter, then it was up to you as to what you were going to do.
Right. Thank you, John. Wayne, I just want to shift a little bit here just for the sake of time to a question. I've heard that damage to properties due to civil unrest is not necessarily covered in general liability policies. Is this typically the case? Also, if you have business interruption insurance, is the loss of business due to riots and pandemic covered under those types of policies. Is that something you can speak on, Wayne?
I can speak a little bit about, and I'm sure, again, we're getting into more legality. John may be more well equipped to deal with that than I would be, but I can tell you this from insurance or business interruption insurance and things of that nature. It really depends on the insurance and the company and the coverage. I mean, there may be some clauses or what have you for certain things, you know. But I think it's on a case-by-case basis from what I've seen in a few companies I've worked for, quite honestly, Diane. It can
basically it really, so basically what I'm hearing is read the fine print, because every contract is different, every insurance company is different with what their coverage is, and we really have to question. You know, and I want to say this to all the planners too, is Larry Cosio, who is with Cosio Insurance, was scheduled to join Wayne today. Larry had a personal accident and he couldn't make it. So, but if you have any specific questions on insurance, I will forward them to him and he will be happy to answer your questions following this event.
The only comment I would make, Diane, is that it's going to depend exactly what Wayne said. Read your policy, not only the small print, but the bold-face print, because the bold-face print is going to tell you what's excluded. And I think in many situations, it'll depend on what the circumstances are, what the policy provides from a business interruption point of view. The one thing, though, I think you're more likely going to find that the policy would cover civil disobedience or a riot or something of that nature than it would be a communicable disease.
Right. And I think in the future, you know, we're certainly going to have more programming on insurance specifically, as things are changing every single day, every week, just to keep up with what we need to know. I just have one comment here. I'm working with a hotel in Florida. If someone has the virus, it is the responsibility of the hotel to reach out to the CDC. They have made that clear to me that they've made it clear to me that it is their responsibility. So there's a lot, I guess, of different discussion going on. And one thing too, Wayne, just to end here, is the concept of COIs. And as a planner, you work with so many vendors and crew and production. A COI obviously says that I have insurance, but we don't know what kind of insurance people have. So we have to be mindful of that as well.
That's very true, Diane, because they're very generalized. And everyone's asking for it now. The hotel's asking us, we're asking the hotels, the sort of third parties, subcontractors. But in honesty, again, you know, there's fine print involved in that. And what is the limit of liability? And there are other things that involve that. We really need to be aware of that, especially now.
Especially now, and just because there are a couple of people in the chat room too that are they're just not clear, and I don't know a specific answer. I'm not clear if someone gets sick at my events, am I legally bound to let attendees know and give them the option of leaving? Well, legally bound, John, or just
no? I mean,
you know?
You may not be legally bound, but you feel from a compassion point of view, you've got to pass it on. I mean, and the other part of the coin is somebody going to come up to you and breathe on you and say, hey, by the way, I've got COVID-19? I don't think so. I think that, again, the practicality, pragmatic aspect of this is if all of a sudden I were to find out that I was positive and had it, I would probably let the sponsor of the meeting know, hey, pass this on for anybody who made contact with me. And I'd probably let them use my name. That would be my social responsibility. But on the other hand, nothing compels me to do that. And I have no responsibility to do that. But I think the moral and the right thing to do, as Martin Luther King said, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing.
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Everyone, we have our chat rooms are going to be open for about 5 minutes. We think that it's a time for you to share some thoughts, maybe come back to us with some topics. Any questions or any of your comments that are not covered just for the sake of time with our program will be answered following the event, just so you know, because I know there's a lot on force majeure and how to handle that. And I remember, John, with force majeure, it's a work in progress. Is that the short answer?
Yeah, there's a short answer, and I know Terry wants to make a comment as well.
Yes, Terry.
Yes, the one thing, and I learned this from Jonathan a long time ago, and many of our other hospitality legal minds out there, we have commercially impracticable in our force majeure clause. And there's 2 points I'd like to make. Every time I called a hotel that had a meeting in March, April, May, even into June now, my opening conversation wasn't, here's a letter from my client's legal department, my client wants to cancel. It was empathizing what the position that the hotel is in, the position that the client is in. Can we have a conversation about a date change and doing an addendum to the contract to make that happen? And every single one of my clients was able to do that. But most importantly, the hotels came back to me and said, the legal proof on commercially impracticable is a much lower bar to meet than illegal or impossible. And as sad as it is, if only 90% or 10% of flights are flying, that doesn't make it illegal. You could still get there. So really that phrase, and I'll defer back to Jonathan that he can expand on that, but that was a very important part of our force majeure clause. But even more importantly, being a good partner with the hotels. We're all in this together. How can we work together and keep it on their books, move it forwards?
Right. I think that that's the major message we've all been following. But I'm going to go back just for the sake of time to Wayne. Wayne, do you have like a closing statement before we go into the chat room on insurance, on where you stand with business resiliency, which seems to be the word of the moment?
I would say just make sure you read the fine print, first of all. I think it's very important that everyone knows exactly what's going on. And also take a look at your companies, take a look at what they're doing, take a look at their plans. Everybody has a risk manager. They may call them different things in different companies, but make sure you have those conversations. If you're a meeting professional, know exactly how your company feels about and how they stand on certain issues, because it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form, especially on the hospitality side. Because we really need to know what we can do internally and what the company's direction is before we can actually go externally and say, okay, fine, we want to place a meeting, we want to do something, and look at the contracts and be realistic. And to Terry's point, really, it's a partnership. Take a look, talk to your hoteliers, talk to your vendors, your third parties. Make sure that everyone's on the same page, because we are really in the same boat here. And I think it's important that we really, especially at this time, as we begin to whatever the new normal will be, or should I say the new reality, let's be very conscious of exactly what that is and how that will affect us in our individual companies.
Right. Well, Wayne, thank you very much, and thank you especially for staying with us today and for mentioning all that we're experiencing right now. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Jim Spellows.
Yep.
There you go.
So let's talk for a second about the breakout rooms. But before we do, I wanted to answer a question John had mentioned. As John asked about contact tracing, just so you know, what's happening there is that Google and Apple have put together their API, and they are not going to be sending out the app. They're submitting it to public health agencies who will be able to use that API to put the contact tracing capabilities into their own app. So you might want to be listening to find out whether CDC or other agencies are going to be putting that out. The real question for a lot of people clearly is, will they use it? And the feedback that's coming in right away is pretty high percentage. Over 50% don't even want that on their phone. Number of reasons: privacy, lack of trust of the organizations who put it together, even though the claim right up front is that it is not capturing any personal information. But a lot of people scratch their heads on that one, saying, how could you actually do that without capturing some level of information? So I just wanted to make sure that got out there to respond to John.
I'm back, Jim. You know, these chat rooms are never long enough. And I think what I'm going to say to everybody is this: we're going to go on with our program for the sake of time. But then when it ends, Jim, if you're okay with it, I'd like to open up chat again for some people. If everyone's in agreement, just hang out a few minutes extra, and we'll do that. Okay. So let us know your feedback, but moving on, let's move on because I'm very appreciative of Ed Cannon, Senior VP of Protection Resources with TNM, and Courtney Klein joining us today. Ed was with us at one of the original events. He was, quite frankly, at one of the largest events in Vegas, ConAgra, one of the last events to actually cancel, right, Ed? Cancel like in the middle of it and ship everybody home when COVID struck way back in the last century, it feels. So Ed and Courtney, welcome today. I'm going to let you take it. Threat and risk assessments, which every planner on this call should write down because it is part of your new responsibility. All right, Ed.
Thanks, Diane. Courtney, would you be kind enough to load our deck so folks can see it? So as Diane indicates, Courtney and I work for a Midtown Manhattan-based full-service security provider called TNM Protection Resources, and we have been connected and friends with Diane for many, many years as a company. And more recently, it's been our pleasure to with Diane immediately following the issues that we had with COVID-19 slamming into our country. So, Courtney, let's move through to the next slide. And as Diane talked about, we're going to be discussing threat and risk assessment. And pretty much what it comes down to is this, that there are so many different threat scenarios, and certainly we've become acutely aware of two significant ones, and one that began about 4 months ago. And,
Hey Ed, can I stop you midstream here because see where your microphone is because some people can't hear you. It's not coming through. I just don't want anyone to miss anything. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
Yep.
that's okay. In fact, what I'll do is I'll let Courtney, why don't you take over?
That's much better.
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay, good. But at any rate, I am going to introduce Courtney and let her walk you through the first talk about threat and risk assessment for events, meetings, as well as crisis and emergency preparedness. And then I'm going to take you through a case study for that large event that occurred in early March, towards the middle of March, in Vegas. So, Courtney?
Thank you, Ed. So threat and risk assessments are a very important thing that you can perform prior to any sort of event in order to make sure that your organization is best prepared to handle anything that comes your way. Naturally, the first part of a threat and risk assessment is first identifying any kinds of threats that may be faced by the event, by your organization, by the attendees. And generally, these fit into three broad categories, and those are natural, accidental, and intentional. Natural risks include things from Mother Nature, hurricanes, wildfires. This pandemic would certainly constitute a natural risk. These are things that we have absolutely no control over, but we all know are still very, very possible. Accidental threats, on the other hand, are things that are caused by humans typically, but they are not malicious in intent. These are things like power loss, an accidental fire, vehicular accidents, things that are certainly going to be an issue if they arise during your event, but not things that you necessarily need to worry about being more problematic as time wears on. Intentional threats are the ones that we tend to think about most. These are things like terrorism, active shooter events, which until recently was definitely the most prescient concern that most people had. Issues like vehicle rammings and any kind of demonstration or civil disorder that may impact the event. Once you identify these threats that are faced by your event, you then have to go through and try to calculate the risk of these events. Risk is not just an arbitrary number that you sort of pull out of anywhere. There is an equation that you can see here that helps you figure out the actual risk that an individual threat poses. So in order to do this, you would look at the threat that you have identified, and there are going to be multiple for any event. and then calculate the threat times vulnerability times the impact, and that's going to get you your risk.
Courtney,
So,
can I ask you a question here, because I'm
yes.
going to speak like as a planner. So I'm used to, for example, I'm used to the old SWOT analyses, right? Strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. How do you put numbers on, or are there numbers with this formula?
So you can choose numbers. This is actually something where somebody who has a background in threat or risk assessment can be very useful, whether it's a security consultant or someone who just specializes in this in general. Typically, it would be based off of your event. It could be a sliding scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 being the, the worst of the situation, 10 being the least problematic, or however you decide to do it. So for example, if you have identified that a car accident outside of your venue could be a threat to your organization, maybe in your scale of threats, that's one that you're worried about, but it's not the one you're chiefly worried about. So you would assign it a number that reflects that. When you're looking at the vulnerability in this situation, you'd have to look at the event as a whole. Is your event at ground level? Is it in a building set far back from the sidewalk? Is your event on the 3rd and 4th floor? These kinds of things are going to be the sort of things you would want to consider when identifying the vulnerability. And then beyond that, you also want to look at the impact. If your event is in a field and there is a car accident nearby, what is the impact going to be there? Potentially very high. If there is damage to the property, damage to people, fatalities, injuries, the impact is going to be much higher than if there is a car accident in the parking lot and your event is up on a higher level. So a lot of it's more of an art than it is a science, quite frankly. So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I think we'll have more questions moving on, but let's just interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So once you identify your risks or identify your threats and calculate the relevant risks, you're going to want to use this information to inform everything else that you do from here on out. So this is going to include reviewing security and crisis plans, not only within your organization and maybe within your specific event, but for the venue that you're part of. If you are in a city or municipality that has their own crisis plans, you'll want to consider those as well. And quite frequently, these can be found online. Most municipalities are very good about putting them out for people to check. You'd also want to review the facility itself. If there is a need to evacuate, for example, is there going to be a bottleneck where people might get caught up? Or if they evacuate through the wrong door, is there going to be some kind of issue where they're running into a greater threat? Similarly, not just talking about evacuations, it's useful to know not only the layout of the facility, but any adjacent issues that may cause a problem. So really good, thorough, top to bottom review of where the event is going to be held is going to be necessary. You are, of course, going to want to identify whatever emergency measures are in place already. Most venues are going to have some kind of plan. It might not be very built out, or it might be super built out. You never know. But working with the people who run the venue, who are there all day, every day, they're going to be a really good resource for this. If you are doing this on your own, or if you're working with, for example, some security consultants like T&M, you're going to want to provide or develop some recommendations that will help improve the security surrounding the event based on the threats and risks that you've identified. So, an example that up until a few months ago, everyone was very, very concerned about, and rightfully still should be, would be an active shooter. If there's an active shooter in your event, there's going to be not only reputational damage, but also likely injuries, loss of life. So when you're going through and providing these recommendations, you would want to look at each thing that has been identified, and from there, provide recommendations for it. And you're also going to want to think about what else might be necessary. Tabletop exercises are really good. We'll get into those a little bit later too, but they help you identify the weaknesses in your plan, in your team, things that maybe you had no reason to think about before. So now you're thinking about them, and you not necessarily would have gotten there without doing a tabletop exercise. And then of course you're going to want to do things like coordinate with local authorities and your venue's security professionals, who will be invaluable tools because, as I said previously, they're there all day, every day. They know what they're doing, and they probably have some kind of relationship with local authorities already. After you do a threat and risk assessment, you can move into the development of your crisis management team and plan. Basic crisis management definition is the overall coordination of an organization's response to a crisis in an effective and timely manner with the goal of avoiding or minimizing damage to the organization's profitability, reputation, or ability to operate. So one of the first things we really need to understand is the difference between an incident, an emergency, and a crisis. An incident is just a thing that happens. It might disrupt operations on different varying levels. And it's important that any event organizer or group of event organizers has the ability to respond to these. An incident may be anything from a crime, someone getting sick, a hazmat spill, a windstorm is going to interrupt operations, some sort of act of terrorism, global pandemic. There are many things that can become an incident. An incident can then escalate into an emergency. And an emergency is an incident that causes or threatens to cause harm to the people at the event. If you think about emergency responders, 911, they're coming in to try to help people stay safe. A crisis, on the other hand, is an incident that might cause damage to the event's reputation or financial standing or operations. So really the primary difference here between an emergency and a crisis is who is going to most likely be damaged. And you can, of course, have an emergency that escalates into a crisis, vice versa, or co-occurring emergencies and crises.
So Courtney, because there's and Ed, there are a couple of questions coming in. Now, typically in a meeting planner or an event planner management role, we have, during the pre-event, we have a risk management meeting where we're introduced typically to the venue with the hotel's director of security. But one comment here is many hotels and centers will not share their emergency plans. If we are meeting in their building, shouldn't they carry the responsibility with regards to exiting a building if there's a fire? I'm confused as to when the client's responsibility comes into plan versus the venue. Who's in charge, Ed?
So I think this, first of all, can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, much better.
Good. So first of all, I think it depends. If you are taking, say, a conference room to host 50 or less attendees, then certainly the level of concern, responsibility that you have regarding emergency procedures of that larger venue is likely more limited than, say, for example, you have an extraordinarily large event where, while it may not be legally your responsibility, and I'll defer to our legal expert colleagues on this platform, but I think that there is going to be a benefit for you to understand and to be able to communicate as appropriate to attendees, exhibitors, speakers, your own staff that's managing the event, what they should do and what they should expect in case of an emergency.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because obviously in your line of work, there's, like in our line, in any line of work, there's a chain of command, right? So you base the situation. Just one other question before I let you go on is, day one of my meeting, I have the security, or it's more of a comment. Day one of my meeting, I asked the security team at the hotel to do a briefing at the first events to, give everyone else what the chain of command, what the operating procedure should be. So
yeah, so I think that's an excellent practice. It's a good best practice that before the beginning of every event, you go over what the schedule is, what occurred yesterday, everything from any current or relevant threats or risks that are arriving. It could be everything from weather to an unannounced, up until now, planned demonstration to the previously unscheduled attendance by a well-known VIP are examples of the types of valuable information that can be shared. It also gives you the chance to do a debrief, a hot wash on how things went yesterday, and to adjust on the fly, if you will, at that quick morning security operational briefing as to what you might be able to do on day 2 to improve on the way things went on day 1.
Thank you. Okay, Courtney, thanks.
Of course. So moving on the definitions, crisis management is, as the term sounds like, it's an act. It's the event's ability to coordinate a response to any incident, emergency, or crisis in a timely manner with the intent of avoiding or mitigating damage to people, facilities, profitability, everything that we're always concerned about. The crisis management team is the preordained group of people who are charged with and trained to handle such events. The crisis management team is usually going to be the group of people who will go through things such as tabletop exercises. They'll be involved in putting together the crisis management plan. They will be the ones who are going on the walkthroughs of the building, meeting with the security professionals at the venue. That would be the crisis management team. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Ed now so he can talk us through a case study from earlier this year.
Thanks, Courtney. So as Diane indicated, we were hired to assist in security planning and crisis or emergency management for a very large international trade show, which was scheduled, as you see, March 9th through the 13th of this year. And those dates should look a little bit familiar because it was, just to refresh your memories, it was on March 10th, for example, that the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. And lots of other events related to the pandemic and its impact here in the United States occurred during those following days. Let's move on, Court. So you saw the types of threats and that a threat and risk assessment looks at, covered under natural, accidental, and intentional malevolent. And what we did for the event organizers, the event planners, well, we conducted a comprehensive threat and risk assessment, because you saw in the slide that Courtney presented, there could be an untold number of potential threats and or risks. And let's face it, you can't protect against everything. So it makes sense to have an assessment done so you can identify the most credible, those that you are most likely to have to face, and then to examine the security program in place to see, are you adequately prepared to mitigate against those identified most credible threats and risks that you face. So in this case, for this particular event, what we determined as to be the potential high-level risk that they face was crime. And quite frankly, when you have, this event was at the Las Vegas Convention Center, both the interior as well as the parking lots were fully utilized. And then the MGM Festival Grounds was a second venue for this same very large event. And while 100,000 people showed up, there were 130,000 that were expected. And the fall off from 130 to 100,000 was largely related to COVID-19, sorry. And what that came down to, it was largely the international travelers who were unable to attend the event, particularly those exhibitors and attendees that were coming from Asia. So we identified crime, active shooter, terrorism, civil disorder, and you see we've highlighted that, and as the intentional malevolent act that could be directed either at the event itself, a particular individual, exhibitor, or attendee, or groups that would be in attendance.
Hey, Ed,
And then,
can I just, we've got so many comments and questions coming in here, so can I just ask you something on this note?
Sure.
So we're talking about, 100,000 person conference meeting event trade show, everything here. But let's go back to the threat and risk assessment and you know what your team does. And the whole is question: what types of meetings typically require this attention to detail? Like, can you give some examples?
So, yeah, you know, a trade show such as this one certainly would. You know, hey, remembering Las Vegas and what occurred there in 2017, which generated, frankly, the level of attention that Vegas now gives towards the threat of active shooter. So any large outdoor type of event, you know, you would benefit, I think, from a threat and risk assessment. Anything that's going to have a large crowd of people, and when I say large, I mean, you know, anything over a couple of thousand people is something that can attract a higher risk, if you will, for two reasons. Number one, the threat incident itself, whether, God forbid, it's an active shooter, vehicle ramming, severe weather, windstorm, earthquake, things along those lines. Regardless of what it is, when you have that many people at a particular venue that are impacted by a negative event occurring, you know, you have to deal with, you know, what have we done to protect those people in attendance from that particular type of identified credible threat or risk.
Right. So if you, oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. And number two, the emergency response, should something bad happen, regardless of what it is, the ability for folks to understand, you know, from the event organizer's perspective, what is their responsibility, obviously shared or more largely owned by the venue itself, but what measures are in place in order to assist in evacuation, whether it's a planned evacuation or more likely to happen at a sudden, unexpected negative incident occurring, a spontaneous mass self-evacuation. Think the Route 91 Harvest Country Festival, you know, one of the most, if not the most horrific active shooter incidents that the country's endured. So, you know, for those two reasons, you know, it's important to have that threat and risk assessment. Part of the assessment, by the way, is not just identifying those credible threats and risks, but knowing what measures are in place. And once you have vulnerabilities identified, that, you know, you see you're susceptible to a particular threat, to try and improve the security posture. So that goes back to understanding what the venue is capable of doing. And I know there was a comment earlier that they won't share their security and emergency plans. Frankly, you know, I haven't encountered that. I think if you are going to be using their venue and paying them for that privilege, you have a right to know what security measures are in place at the venue.
Sometimes in my experience too, Ed, is I will meet with the risk management team on site. They'll give me a contact. If I bring in my own director of security, they will talk amongst themselves and then basically just tell the planner what the procedure is should anything happen. But let me just shift over here because we have a lot of questions. If you don't mind, I'd rather this and then go back to this. And this is something that you and I discussed. And by the way, this checklist, there's a checklist that does exist. Ed did a checklist for us a couple of events ago that I will put in the resources guide today, because someone says, I'm a sole business owner. Who would be my crisis management team? Barring that they don't bring you in, does that come from my client? Is it the venue? Is it the city officials, local PD? Do I hire my own people? What do I do? Because think about what we're talking about today. Meeting planners are responsible for risk management. What do you do as an independent?
So I think to answer the question directly in terms of who's on the crisis management team, is it your the the small business event planner or the client? And if by client, what I assume you mean is those that are sponsoring and going to be running the event. And I think that the crisis management responsibility falls more towards them, with you as an event planner being a member of that crisis management team. So
So as the planner, be part of that, but if your client is a corporate client, your client is an association, your client is a wedding. There's threats with every kind of live gathering, depending on all of the factors involved.
Right. So I don't think any reasonable expectation that an event planner who's is helping to coordinate and arrange a large event for a corporate or private client should be expected to be a one-person crisis management team. By
Right,
definition,
but let's
that
just
can't
say
happen.
this. I'm going to say this just for the few people who are writing in, that maybe they're not responsible, but the meeting planner is responsible for bringing up, for their own good, the concept of risk management. And if it's not being handled, and this is a Jonathan question, an insurance question, how much goes into the contract to protect my staff and my team versus anything that's a live gathering? So I think it's a case by case. Going back to what Courtney spoke about, that formula, right, to determine how much we need. But in today's world, this might just be an extra mark on the checklist.
Right. And that formula is threat, what could happen, vulnerability, how likely is it to happen, and what weaknesses are there that would allow it to happen, and then impact. What would be the result? Those come together to measure your most critical risk that you face and should be trying to address.
Right, and I think just going back to what Courtney was speaking about with the formula there is, I think there's two, and Ed, Courtney, help me with this. There's two components basically of any kind of analysis. One is the physical building and the environment and the threats, and then one is the people, right? So you have those two different focuses, don't you?
Yeah, that's certainly true. And it's not just the venue itself, but it's also, I think Courtney referenced, you have to look at adjacent facilities. What's nearby that could impact as well. And you take kind of a holistic approach, particularly for the larger events. And if I think that those folks that we're together with today have all been at events where they've never thought of deploying, let's say, for example, weapons screen, to be part of the security process to get in. And they've probably also been part of, or at least know of, events where you wouldn't think of holding the event without doing weapons screening for that particular event. And there are many large events. Think of professional sporting events, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, hockey. All the venues that host these by league standards are now requiring weapons screening before they go in.
I think what you're bringing up is a very important topic, Ed, and it's coming up here. And to everyone who's commented in questions, again, we will address all of them. But I think there has to be extra measure now on security and risk management within the hotels and the venues we work with, and just what kind of plan exists to make sure. Because the bottom line is, as someone pointed out, and I agree with you, Lisa, is when something goes wrong, all eyes are on the planner if there's a program. so, you know, Ed, I know we took questions and time out of this. We have to kind of wrap this up. Is there one statement you can make just with your experience on this venue and what you could leave people with? And thanks for answering the questions that came in.
Sure. So, Courtney, I tell you what, in order to do that, let's jump to the last slide.
And we'll share your deck.
You know, one more thing. Can we just go, Courtney, go back. I just want to highlight something that we did for this. And when we did the threat and risk assessment, can you go back one more, please? Okay. So this threat and risk assessment, the event was in March, as you see. At the end of January, you see the date there. And this is about COVID-19. At that time, there were 450 cases, at least reported, by the Chinese government, and 17 deaths. One case confirmed in the U.S. And that, you know, what we ended up saying, as you can see, is that, you know, that we already were watching to see what was occurring in China and pointing out, hey, there's going to be 100,000 people. Here are some things you can do to remain safe. And look, the Center for Disease Control deemed the risk to the American public to be low at that point in time. Go to the next slide, please. However, given the timing 2 months before the event, there could be a potential impact such as travel restrictions, reduced attendance, increased need for medical services. So I think the client was very happy with us, in fact, that we put this on their radar, because it just grew more and more from that point of view. And similarly and timely, given the events, listen, none of us could have guessed that what's going on in virtually every major city in the country could have been predicted 10 days ago. But certainly, I think we couldn't argue that it would have a major impact if any of us had an event scheduled in any of these cities. So we also talked about how protest demonstrations can be unpredictable and have the potential to adversely affect operations and individuals that are in close proximity. So just wanted to point that out. Now, Courtney, if you could jump to the last slide. So I pointed those things out just as the value in having a professional threat and risk assessment done. So what should you consider now that we're in this? Hey, we just stated it's important to be able to identify risk and be prepared to handle a crisis. Next. Frequently communicate measures in place that are going to be in place in order to enhance the confidence of all that are involved. Next. Measures such as physical distancing, masks, thermal screening are likely to be requirements for at least the near to midterm future. And next. So contingency plans like handling incidents where a participant exhibits symptoms or tests positive. That was lots of questions early on about what the responsibility is. Identify that beforehand. You shouldn't be making that up on the fly as it occurs. And lastly, develop crisis management plan and the crisis management team to facilitate effective response and recovery. The bottom line is you can't possibly have every threat covered by a written protocol and document. What a crisis management team is able to do, regardless of what the incident is, they are able to effectively and promptly communicate, make decisions, and touch base with all the affected stakeholders in order to be able to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. And very important, at this moment in time, we are focused on COVID-19. We are now focused on civil disorder. If and when you have an event, don't get caught up in what the threat and risk at that moment in time is, to the exclusion of everything else. Make sure you understand what all your credible threats and risks are, and those most likely to happen, and to address those.
Yeah, so, you know, so Ed, just to wrap up here, because there are planners and there are people online right now who have one extreme situation to another, who have clients who say, no, we're not going to meet this year. We're going to do, we're going to plan a virtual meeting, figure it out. okay? And then we have people online who just shared with me that said, no, we're going to absolutely do an in-person meeting. Live, forget it, just keep planning it. Now, what I'm thinking that we can ask everyone to leave with from this is the following. If you can show and demonstrate the risk assessment that's involved with either live or hybrid or both, then you are giving people food for thought so that they can look at something on paper and make a decision. If we go back to the formula of the threat and risk assessment, and someone sees that on paper and they have time to think about it, and we look ahead and you get information from a reliable source, that helps. The other thing, Ed, that everyone's asking for is the checklist. So we'll look at that checklist we did about a month or two ago, and see how we can add to it given today's climate. Can you give us a quick wrap up before we bring on our next speaker?
If I was an event planner, what I would be doing is I would find where I can track two major things. Number one, where I want to have my event. I want to understand what are going to be the state and local government's requirements, guidelines, recommendations that I'm probably going to have to comply with, and have an understanding, is that something I'm able to do, or should I perhaps look for somewhere that is not going to be perhaps as difficult to run my event because they're so heavy with the restrictions. For example, thermal screening. Depending on the size of your event, going to be very, very difficult to do that. Contact tracing. We've talked about what a headache that can be. So understand that different states and different jurisdictions are going to have different requirements, recommendations, and regulations. Number two, I'm going to be tracking the incident level of COVID-19. How many people are getting sick where, how many being hospitalized, how many deaths are there. And I think there's a good chance that different locations are going to be experiencing different spikes at different moments in time. So tracking that as an understanding of how my event might be impacted, understanding the level of virus in the area where I want to hold the event, and as well as, if I can, identify where my attendees are coming from also. So these are the types of data gathering and analysis that I don't think we had to do before, but make a lot of sense now.
They make a lot of sense. And so the only thing I'd leave you with, and one of our attendees shared this online, is to put into your contracts that you expect full disclosure, security, transparency, and what the up to the minute facts are from the people you're working with. Okay, thank you, Ed, thank you, Courtney. I appreciate it, everyone. I think we're going to move on and bring on Jim Spellos, our next speaker, and then after that, Jim, we'll open up the floor. Okay, Jim.
There's so much good stuff about risk management, Diane, but I'll tell you, it's a true story. Yesterday, I got an email about a group wanting me to come speak in August. Talk about now a risk management dilemma. And I so love what Courtney and Ed, and also going back to what Wayne and John were all talking about regarding risk management and liability. But I got to talk to everyone that we have this big picture in mind about risk management. But I want to focus micro for the next 10 minutes. I want to focus on all the risk management that we're not doing for our own personal safety and security online. So got 10 minutes, maybe we'll take a couple extra. We're going to do some tips and tricks and some ideas, and how we're going to start this conversation really becomes very simple. Is this a legit website? Take a look at it. 2020 coronavirus stimulus check. home, about, services, blog, looks good. The pandemic, 1200 check, there are cookie policies in there. Guess what, gang? This isn't legit. This is fake. How do you know? Well, sometimes you don't. We are so tasked to click on things, to have that response mechanism right away, that we see something that we know is going to positively impact us. And all of a sudden we're going to click there. And before you know it, we're putting in our email address. Maybe we're even putting in a password. And guess what? We're caught. We're trapped. While I want you thinking extensively about Ed and Courtney's conversation and the risk management on the macro level, I want to talk about it on the personal level right now. Not even at the event necessarily, but everything you're doing online to make sure you're not a statistic either. You gotta have all your defenses up. So a couple of the standard things that we will either talk about now or just brief over. I mean, the conversation about phishing scams is as old as the internet is, yet at the same time, we're seeing new variants coming out, even to the point of hopping on the COVID-19 fear that is out there. So we have to be very aware. We're going to take a look and have you sort of figure out whether some of the things you're going to see are legit or aren't legit. As we get back to live meetings, we want to make sure you're aware of what's known as a man-in-the-middle attack. And that is when somebody actually co-opts the internet that you're trying to pull your information onto and from, and they're sitting in between you and, let's say, the coffee shop server, which means everything you're typing in is being seen by their computer unless you're protecting yourself properly. And oh, by the way, I mentioned coffee shop. I could also mention the person in the sleeping room next to you at the hotel, because that is not an uncommon thing to have happen. So the more we start traveling and getting back to whatever the new abnormal is going to be, these man-in-the-middle attacks are going to be very important for you to be aware of. So are the fileless attacks. Those are attacks when you're using things like the USB ports in airports, in planes, in public spaces to charge your devices. Do you know how easy it is for a bad actor to put something in one of those USB ports, which means the minute you attach your phone or your computer to it, bingo, you're already in big trouble. Also, a lot of times, and you've heard of for years and years, don't download files with macros in them. Macros are a nice little way for attacks, viruses to get onto your computer. And then especially with phishing, we have the large topic of ransomware. So what we want to do right now is I want to play a little game. I want to show you a couple of legitimate, well, I won't call them phishing scams because some are and some aren't, but emails that have been received, and I want you to determine whether it's a real deal or if it's a phishing scam. So the first one is going to be something that's going to come from Netflix, and it says your account has been suspended. And then the address is Dear Netflix. Boy, doesn't that make you think right away something's wrong with this picture? And we're sending you this email to let you know that your credit card has been expired. To update your account information, please visit your account with a link. Do you click on that? Really? You even have to think twice that you click on that? Clearly not the case of what we need to be talking about. That is as much of a phishing scam, an old school scam as we've seen. And I think all of our defenses are up enough to be able to see this. The next one, however, and actually the next two, are ones that I've received in the past couple of weeks. This came from one of my doctors. And this is exactly the email that was sent. It was from the organization. It had their logo. It had exciting news as the title. And then it had a document in the bottom. Do I open it? Do I not open it? Well, guess what, gang? I know the person who this came from, so I texted them. I didn't open it. I'm not going to do that. And guess what? That was legit. That's how they sent the email. I got to tell you, in 2020, well, shoot, even if we were talking about this in 2013, but certainly in 2020, the fact of the matter is that if we don't have our eyes and ears open constantly with all the different communications we're getting and understand that we could be at the expense of a bad actor, a hacker, a malevolent player to be able to access our information just by putting a bad piece of software on our computer because we were silly enough to click on that link. Okay, so that's number two. The next one came to me a few weeks ago, and this is the exact note I got. It says, attention, urgent message from New York State Department of Labor. And I'll read it to you. It's from no reply at labor.newyork.gov. Nothing really suspicious there. You see those no replies a lot in emails. And it says, attention, you have an urgent message from New York State Department of Labor. Please sign in. And notice that the sign in link is a little bit longer than the words itself, using your ny.gov ID to access the message. Well, I shared this with my wife, and I said, you want to see a scam? And I showed it to her. She goes, you should click on that. That's legit. I go, no, can't be. That can't be legit. All my spidey senses were up saying that's no way that's right. So I did some more digging, okay? So I was able to right click on those links like that one and find out, well, where does that take me to? Well, the link there took me to, and look at the real subtlety here. The link took me to applications.labor.newyork.gov/individual-reg, where the actual website didn't have that last reg on there. Now, one thing I want to point your attention to right here is where you see the end of the dots, newyork.gov, that last line, the last letters before the final gov. That's where, if the email is going to be flawed or spoofed, you're going to see a distinctive change there. And there's no change. So I checked further on the New York Gov, and the link there, the difference was actually kind of weird, because on one hand, the difference was mentioning the lack of an HTTPS, and one had a www. All really, really strange in terms of this being an issue here. So I looked, and I looked some more, and guess what? That was legitimate. Boy, if I ever had the opportunity to talk to right now the state of New York about how to send emails, or probably any state, I would give them a piece of my mind, because I wasn't going to click on that. And you know what? If you don't, I'm kind of proud of you. We've seen a lot of scams that have happened in the past 2 months. Some stats, for those of you who don't want to just see what the actual emails look like, but some of the stats we're seeing right now, over 145,000 suspicious domains have been identified just in the first quarter alone, and over 130% increase in sites promising small business loans. You don't think that's preying on our needs to become more financially solvent? And over 60,000 fake banking sites created. This is just in the first couple of months. They're preying on our need to get information, on our desire to get it quickly, and to get information that's going to support us. We have to stay strong with the risk management. You may or may not have seen this one, that business continuity plan announcement starting May 2020. Microsoft has indicated to everyone, this is called the LokiBot malware, and malware stands for malicious software. And they're using this to get you to click on it, and then all of a sudden to drop something on your computer. So what might that look like? What might actually go into your computer? Well, what this particular malware does is, first of all, it's going to steal your credentials, because it's going to ask you to log in, username, password, bam. And if you're using the same password over and over again, well, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but you're massively in trouble. But on top of that, it's putting what's known as a keystroke logger. That does exactly what it says it does. As you're typing stuff, every single key that you are typing in, it registers and sends back to them. What does that mean? Well, shoot. That means that when you type in username, password, financial information, that's going right to the people that you don't want to have that. And if you're in the government or healthcare side, what about this one? And I sort of laughed almost when I saw this, the government targeting with free fast food coronavirus phishing scandal. Do they have no morals nor some good sense about types of things we should be eating? Jeez, gang. And then the CARES Act stimulus. We haven't even finished this yet. And this came from, technically, American Express, but baloney. It wasn't from American Express. Hello, valued member. That's a red flag thing right there. When you don't see your name in there, or you see something misspelled, your senses should be just going haywire. But the thing really to note is that little blue link that says tap here to proceed. Really, when you tap there, you see it's a huge Google document. If you don't know the person that is sending it to you, and you can't be 100% sure, like I did with my doctor, you are far better to connect with them directly rather than trying to click on that. Because you click on that link and enter anything, let the enterer beware, I guess is what to say. And with all this happening, we haven't even focused on ransomware that much, but it's still out there in a massive way. And what it is, a phishing scam that anybody in the organization who accidentally clicks on a link, it doesn't even have to enter username or password, just clicks on a link, and it could put a lockdown, encryption on the entire organization. Lock you out from all your files until you pay ransom, hence the name. How much? Sometimes they don't ask for much. Sometimes they ask for a little more. I guarantee you, if you talk to Ed and Courtney, they would tell you that the constant approach is never to pay the ransom. But if an organization is out there not paying the ransom and not having any of their files accessible, that's a tough call on an individual basis. One other footnote here, that hotel on the left, a high-end 4-star Austrian resort, had a ransomware that didn't affect their files. It affected every room key in the hotel. You see, all the rooms are connected to a computer, and using the Internet of Things, they were able to lock everybody out of their room. Guess what? They not only paid the ransom, but then they went public and made sure everyone knew what happened, because this is happening in our industry. And if we had more time, and I know Dianne, I don't, cryptocurrency mining, the fact that we have huge amounts of people wanting your computer power to be able to make and receive and win Bitcoins. And I ain't going into that whole process right now. But sometimes the hack can be as simple as sort of tapping your computer power so they can answer these mathematical questions that can earn them Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency monies. Yikes.
That's incredible. So so they do it like a game then, Jim?
Well, what actually happens is that they are asked to solve a mathematical problem. That's how the Bitcoins are put on the market. And I think it's every 2 weeks. And they said this is an enormous mathematical problem. And the person who can solve it first gets a Bitcoin. This happens on a regular basis. So
are you talking like to regular people or to those in that space?
You and me, anybody who wants to be there, we can be part of this. But we darn well better have a seriously strong computer to be able to process it faster than somebody else. So I have a weak computer, but I'm a slimy hacker. So what am I going to do? I'm going to send a piece of malware to you and maybe your closest 500 friends. And if they all click on it, what I've put on the computer, and by the way, Dianne, I don't do this, just so we're clear, it's the group I am talking about here. But what would happen is that I would be able to now tap into everyone's processing power. There's only 2 ways you're going to notice that. One is that your computer's starting to slow down really extensively, and there's no reason for that to happen. You don't have a lot of things open. The second reason that it will happen, the second thing you'll notice, is that your electricity bill is going to go up because your computer processing is going to be going on nonstop. Pretty amazing stuff. And it's actually a world I don't even want to walk down. But you got to be aware that it's there.
Well, yeah, but Jim, wait, I have to ask you this too. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to bring Wayne into this. If Wayne, are you still with us here?
I'm here.
Yeah, so Wayne, does this go on an insurance policy? Like, do you now have to protect your I don't know, Jim, do you have to protect your group now from malware, from what, is there insurance on that yet?
There is. Absolutely. It's called cyber insurance.
Yep.
And it's becoming more common than we realize. But again, there are certain coverages for each insurance company that carries that. And again, the truth is in the fine print. There's certain limits to cyber insurance because it's so new. Obviously, can you imagine a huge company, especially a company that, say, like a software or a tech company? I mean, they could lose billions of dollars. So an insurance company would not take on that risk by themselves. It could be many insurance companies or reinsurance for that matter that would actually cover only a portion of the risk. So again, depending upon the coverage, depending on the line of business, it would kind of determine exactly where and how much would be covered.
How much you're covered. And then I don't know if Jonathan is still with us, but then where is that in our contracts?
Well, I'm here, Dianne, and basically When you're dealing with cyber insurance, that's a different deal overall, as Wayne has indicated. And from your contract standpoint, you're not worried so much about the contracts that you have as you are with the insurance coverage that you have. You might say, and you might want to shift some liability to the other side, that they will indemnify you should personal information be given to the other side or to the vendor, that they will take on any risk of the violation or infringement of that information. It's a whole different world out there, but you know, we carry, as a law firm, we carry that for darn sure, and we encourage our clients for sure to carry it as well.
Hey, John and or Wayne, what % of the people in our industry do you think are carrying that? Would you say it's under 5%, under 1%? What do you think?
I would hope everybody is, Jim, but realistically, so many of them don't carry, and this is a real problem with a small, medium professional, third-party, independent. They don't even carry good, comprehensive general liability.
Absolutely.
So you feel the same way? It's pretty minimal and pretty sad.
Pretty minimal, and could be expensive. I mean, that would also preclude a lot of the smaller businesses to even consider it at that point. It's almost like a rider for that real expensive engagement ring. You might have your homeowner policy, but you may not have a policy specific to that because you say, well, I have a safe in the house. Or you have internal, that could be the same thing as the internal mechanisms and safeguards and firewalls in your company, that you might feel like you may have a reliance on that, as opposed to really delving into a much more insurance, a very expensive add-on.
So I think this is interesting because it sort of ties a lot together here, thinking about this. So if I'm an independent planner or a planner, this is one more thing to bring to my customers' attention about the threat and risk that's associated with it. And if I, as a small business or an independent business, don't have that insurance, do I then put something in my contract that says I'm not responsible if anything happens?
No, what you do, Diane, is you make yourself named as a co-insured with their policy,
Right.
and also include yourself as being indemnified by them for any misuse. If I have a computer vendor or I have a software vendor or anybody else, I want them to be responsible for what their software includes as to protecting me from any kind of malware, ransomware, anything else that might be there that can be infected through their system. Now, that's a hard task to really delineate.
I want to bring this conversation back into the reality is that with all this great stuff on insurance that we're talking about, it isn't the organization who makes the mistake. It's the individual person.
You're
it's
right,
the person who gets an email and clicks on a link. And as a matter of fact, the next thing I was going to talk about, which really plays into this conversation, is the biggest threat that we have to really think about is called social engineering. It's how Target was hacked. How were they hacked? How did that massive hack happen a couple of years ago? Well, it was two guys who come at the end of the week into their offices dressed as heating, ventilation, and air conditioning maintenance. About 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, they said they're there for their quarterly inspection. Front desk let them in. 15 minutes later, the hack was done. So if everyone out there wants to just do a quick Google at some point on social engineering, go to YouTube actually. There are some amazing videos on how easy it is for people to give up their own information. So it really is that there's this beautiful lineage and this beautiful combination of the macro, of the insurance, of the legal, of the risk management, and the micro of the individual person who needs to be aware of all this, because we just can't assume that if our organization is good at insurance that we're fine. Because for example, when Vegas got hit, when Baltimore got hit and the CVBs there, you know, it really took an awful lot of work on their part to be able to get back into business as normal, which obviously we know, John, isn't happening anytime soon in general.
Jim, let me give you an anecdote. When I was in college, I was a fraternity member. Our fraternity, the symbol was an owl. We had I was at Northwestern. We had a chapter at the University of Chicago. They had at the top of their fraternity house owls on masonry, top of the house. This was before I got there, but some enterprising brothers before I was there went downtown, they rented a truck, they had scaffolding. They set up the scaffolding. This is like in broad daylight. They set up scaffolding. They went up to the top of Trinity House. They chipped off the owls, brought them down, put them in the back of the truck, and then brought them back to our house at Northwestern, and they adorned either side of the fireplace. Broad daylight, broad daylight. They set up, people all went by, thought it was business as usual. That's what we're dealing with. Everybody is thinking this is business as usual. And if you don't question it, you're going to be a victim.
No question about that.
I have a couple of questions that came in. Speaking of that, I have negotiated a date change. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I just left here. Can an attendee sue a major brand like a Marriott or Hilton when they've stayed at one of their properties if the brand was hacked and the attendee suffered financial losses?
John, that's you.
Well, Marriott was hacked big time. I think it was 120 million people. Their data, including passport, other information, were hacked. Marriott immediately went on the defensive, sent out credit watches, et cetera, et cetera. You had one of the major credit watch services get hacked for all of their people who had even more sensitive data. Sure, I mean, there is a responsibility on the part of the property. If they're hacked, by law, they have certain responsibilities that they have to notify people in the event of a hack and their personal identification information is disclosed, what responsibilities they have. Let's go back a couple of years now to the European Union and the general data protection regs that were issued there, and the fines can be substantial in the billions of euros, quite candidly. So, yeah, there's a lot of liability out there, and people need to protect themselves. But I think I'll go back to Jim's thing. On you and I and everybody else watching this, we have our own little personal responsibility of let's monitor it, let's exercise our own due care, and if you don't think it looks legit, it probably isn't. And so why even take the chance? If they really want to get hold of you, come back, they can pick up the phone and call you.
Right. I think this is a good reminder, Jim.
And part of the problem is that right now with all the deep fakes that are happening, even if it looks legit, it very well might not be. And that's something that we have to, as a generation, have to wrap our brains around. That nothing you believe, that you see, you really have to believe, you can believe at face value anymore. And I think that's probably the biggest message that, from my perspective, again, on the micro level here, on the individual level, that we want to get everyone to understand, which is sort of take a step back when you get a piece of information, excuse me, when you see a site, when you go somewhere, and think about whether is that legit, is that something that's going to take away my privacy or my security?
Well, and Jim, I'll go back a little bit more here. And my day, when I called technical support, it was basically replace the light bulb in the overhead projector. And I think what we have to do these days is be right on top of it. If it doesn't look right, or even if it does seemingly look right, if it's unordinary as to the kind of email you normally be getting, call TI.
Yep. And a good IT department right now is putting together these processes where they're sending out what looks to be legitimate emails that look to be legitimate fakes in the effort of trying to get to see who on the staff is clicking through there. And when they click, they'll get a pop-up message. You really shouldn't have clicked on this, and it's from IT. What they've identified is the biggest problem in most organizations is C-suite, is that they're the ones who are doing the most damage there in terms of clicking through, possibly because of time, possibly because they're just not aware of all the risks that are involved. So this is a massive, massive issue that's out there that we got to be able to get one person at a time understanding how to protect themselves. By the way,
Jim, I have to, just for the sake of time, thank you both, because this is a good continuation for one of our future. This conversation will never end.
No,
because we constantly, but we want to remember from this is don't believe everything you read.
Hey,
all right,
Diane,
Jim, you want to take it home?
Yeah, let me take it home. I want to give you 5 tips. I want to just, people have 5 things they need to be able to realize. We're going to go through these really quickly. What you have to have in your computer. Number 1, and possibly the least important, an antivirus system. It's probably there already. You might not like the one you have, but make sure that it's running in the background at all time. Even more important, number 2, an anti-malware solution. Sometimes the antivirus companies offer this and an additional fee. I use a separate one. I'll never recommend any. What I use is Malwarebytes. I think it's great. The good thing about anti-malware, you can have more than one on your device. You can also have them on your mobile devices. And this is going to protect you if you do click that thing that's putting something on your computer, that it will block it and quarantine it so it never gets to your operating system. That's number 2. Number 3, especially as we're back on the road, a VPN, a virtual private network. Whether it's company sponsored, whether it's your own that you're using, this is going to encrypt all of your communication. So if you do have that bad actor hitting the man in the middle attack, that you're not going to have a situation where your data is exposed unnecessarily. Truly a critical thing in our industry, and one huge slap at a couple of facilities around the country who disable individual VPNs because they think it's not secure for their purposes. I would actually say that that's a massive legal and insurance issue that is waiting to happen when someone gets slammed with any sort of virus or malware at their facility, because you wouldn't let me put a VPN on my service and work with your internet. Number 4, and I can go for 2 hours on this password manager, critical. Number 5, 2-factor authentication. All those boring 5-6 digit codes you get when you have to log on, and now you have to pull your phone out and get the text message. Get over it. Just do it, because in case someone does hack your password, if they haven't gotten your mobile device where the text is coming, you still may be in the clear. So 5 layers: antivirus, anti-malware, VPN, password manager, 2-factor authentication. Stay safe. No, that's not my social security number. Back to you, Diane.
Jim, thank you. And again, more to come from Jim Spellos in the next few weeks, because Jim, questions come in like when a spam call comes in on your cell, that it's not from your own area code now. The old trick they're doing now. Do they have your info now? Is there a yes or a no to that?
That one's a maybe, actually, just because you get a spam call. If their own area code, you answer, they don't give you information, but whatever you give them will be used against you.
And what about what's the short answer to put on your iPhone to protect? Is there anything to put on your iPhone to protect this stuff?
You get a big jar of common sense and just put it right next to the iPhone every night, so maybe it seeps in while you're charging it. No, there's nothing, and especially with iPhones, they don't even let you add any additional security on there, because they A, do a slightly better job, but B, they want to make sure they control what gets in and what doesn't get in. So yeah. Common sense.
So don't try peanut butter.
Well, if it stops you from clicking on the link, absolutely try.
Right. Well, anyway, thank you so much. Lot to take in, everybody, and thank you for hanging in with us today, because we just wanted to keep going and share as much as we could. I want to welcome our next speaker, and I'm wholeheartedly welcoming Jen Slaw, because Jen, welcome, by the way. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We have a somberness over today that we are all sharing, but I know my own personal life that we all want to go on with our lives, and we want to always remember that good prevails, and the stronger we stay internally, the better it is for the whole world, so that we can carry all that good with us. And so we're wrapping up today's program with Jen Slaw. Jen is going to adapt her program a little bit. And Jen, I don't mind if you give us a little bit maybe of imaginary work of what you do. Thank you.
Okay, Diane, thanks for having me. So, as Diane said, my job is to wrap up today and, give you some strategies for staying nimble in these trying times. And as I said on our pre-call, I kind of felt like juggling is a little too light for the heaviness that we're all dealing with right now. And then I thought of a story from one of the first times that I volunteered with Juggling Life, which is a charity that I now direct that uses juggling and performance arts to engage, inspire, and empower ill and underprivileged youth. And we were partnering with an organization called Homefront in Trenton that helps families dealing with homelessness. And we were brought in to work with some young girls who were struggling with homelessness, to teach them how to juggle, to teach them some performing skills, as a way to empower them and help them to redefine what's possible in their lives. And when I saw the transformation, you know, in their whole body language, their whole attitude in a short period of time, going from I can't juggle to, you know, seeing that there was this possibility of something they didn't think they could do, I started to see that, you know, this little tool of learning how to juggle could have such a bigger impact and could really translate into the powerful ability to see that something we once thought impossible is achievable. So it's really been a tool that has allowed me to connect and engage with people. And I think that's what we need right now, to hopefully make a difference. You know, and as Dianne said, to another aspect is taking into account our own health and well-being and balance, and how do we keep ourselves fulfilled and keep that sense of purpose in mind so that we can move forward and serve others in these difficult times. So I'd love to share a little bit of, you know, what I've experienced with you. I'd love to see your cameras on. So for those of you, you know, you're event planners, some of you guys are planning virtual meetings, and you know that the engagement level goes to another level when we see those faces. So go ahead and turn those cameras on, because I'd love to see who's here today. There we go. I see some smiling faces. Excellent. Surprise. I see Anne Sophie, who is someone that I knew from years ago. So I'm so happy to see you there. It's wonderful to see those faces. So how many of you, you know, feel that you're juggling a lot right now? Just go ahead and in the chat, type in a Y for yes or an N for no. Why you feel like you're juggling more, juggling balls that you can handle. Okay, I'm seeing some yeses. Yes, 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 absolutely. Absolutely, Bonnie. Yes, we're all juggling more than ever before. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides with you. There we go. Everybody seeing that? There we go. So that's my little guy, my son, and you know, we're all juggling the demands of work and family. And what I want to do, you know, in our short time together today is just wrap up with inviting you to think like a juggler and really looking at how can you embrace the idea of continuous learning, continuous improvement, to never stop tweaking and refining to move forward amidst all this change. And to really, you know, be aware that yes, the ball could drop, and we want to do as much as we can to keep that from happening. And we want to pick it up when it does drop and learn what went wrong and make an adjustment for the next attempt. However, we don't want to be afraid to let go of the ball. We want to be able to move forward. So there we go. Just checking out those slides. Okay. So are you seeing the overwhelm and fear slide? Because I'm not seeing the slides right now. So Dianne, could you just let me know that the slides are, or Jim, that the slides are up?
Yeah, Jen, I don't see that. I just see your home slide and I don't see the next one. So
Just see the home
there
slide.
we go. Okay, we've got it now. Now
Cool.
you're seeing overwhelm and fear?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So what we want to do is really look at, you know, with all this change, with all this uncertainty, so many of us find ourselves in a place of overwhelm and fear. And what we want to do is look at how do we move from that place of overwhelm and fear to a place of creative exploration where we can start to innovate and come up with new creative solutions. And the way I see it, there's three components. There's embracing continuous learning and improvement so that, as I said, we're always understanding more and tweaking and refining. There's looking at how can we integrate our work and our lives more effectively so that we become more resilient to handle all these changes and we feel more balanced and more fulfilled. And then there's collaboration. How can we work together to come up with those new creative solutions? And because we have such a short time together, we're going to focus today just on that piece of continuous learning and improvement, of always learning and understanding at a deeper level. So what I want you to invite you to do today is to embrace the juggler's mindset, as I call it, which really has three components. And this is how we can enhance the learning process. And we can really look at breaking existing patterns and building new ideas. So three components. We have to have a clear goal. We have to understand what we're trying to achieve and how can we break that down. We have to really embrace a growth mindset where we believe that our skills can be cultivated through practice and through effort, and that failure is really an opportunity for us to grow, you know, that I can learn to do anything, that feedback is constructive. And then we have to look at how can we put deliberate practice into place, as we call it in the juggling world. You know, we're open to feedback. We maybe have a mentor. We have that clear goal defined, and we're willing to step outside of our comfort zones to achieve something new. So I learned how to juggle in the 6th grade, and this is a photo of my middle school juggling club, which I'm sure you can imagine is the really cool club to be in middle school. But this teacher here sitting down with the 3 red juggling balls, he taught our class how to juggle as a lesson in focus and concentration. And so from the very start, you know, of learning how to juggle, and I won't go into my whole story, but from the very start of learning how to juggle, I saw that there were other principles, that these principles of juggling could apply to our lives in different ways. So, this took me on a journey, and eventually I came up with this ball formula, which I'd love to share with you today. It's called BALL. I love acronyms. So I really want to invite you to just embrace these 4 principles today moving forward. We start juggling with a single ball. BALL. Break it down, ask for help, learn from the drops, and let it go. And you can see these 4, simple principles, when applied to our lives and work, can really have a transformative effect on what we can achieve and what we can discover. So just really quickly, I'll touch on each component. Break it down. We don't start juggling. If I'm going to start juggling, 3 balls, I don't start with all 3. I start with 1 ball and I take it 1 step at a time so that I can focus on one thing at a time and really build that skill before moving on to the next. So in these days of total overwhelm, how can we break down, what we have to do and take it 1 step at a time? And how can we focus and prioritize what's important versus what's urgent and ongoing struggle? And then how can we connect the dots of all of those things that we have to juggle? So if you look at juggling, it's not only about the throws, but it's about this and the catches, but it's about the space between the throws. So you can see that if I throw 1 ball particularly high up in the air, I wait longer before releasing the next ball. So it really becomes a fun project to look at how are those balls connected in your own life. And there might be different ways that the different things you're juggling are connected. And of course, that pattern will be different for each of us. So really looking at how do we break it down, and then how do we build it back up and put that puzzle together in a way that helps us to feel more balanced. Asking for help, of course, this can be difficult and so important in times of change and uncertainty to really reach out. I mean, that's why a lot of you are here today, to learn from each other. How can we collaborate? How can we build those connections? And how can we communicate more effectively so that we understand our own team? How does our own team learn, work, and communicate so that we can utilize those strengths moving forward to come up with innovative ideas as we navigate this totally unknown world of events moving forward? And then it's really building that mutual respect and trust, because that's where innovation will come from. That innovation will happen when we build an environment where everyone feels trusted and respected and supported, and then can contribute their ideas. Learn from the drops. So this is a key. We have to start, we have to analyze, and then we have to practice. So we start, we let go of the ball. One of the first things we do when I'm teaching how to juggle is we throw the ball up in the air, throw, and instead of catching them, we throw, drop. And then we look down, we see where they landed, we pick them back up, and we make an adjustment for the next attempt. So important to really embrace this idea that, our mistakes are stepping stones to our success if we can really analyze what went wrong and make an adjustment for the next attempt. And then that leads us to a process or a system moving forward. And then finally, let it go. We need to let go of old patterns that are holding us back, letting go of unrealistic expectations and patterns that may not be working anymore in this new environment. We need to see what we can personally delegate, automate, or eliminate. And, sometimes embrace that idea that done is better than perfect, because perfection doesn't really exist. And while we're striving to be the best we can be, we have to acknowledge that that can sometimes lead to procrastination if we're honest with ourselves. And then, of course, it's just, letting go and having that mindset shift where the obstacles that we face now become opportunities for learning, change, and growth. So I want everybody to just say that to yourself with me. Break it down, ask for help, learn from the drops, and let it go. And when we really embrace these 4 principles, we now have an action plan. We have a support team. We have a process or a system, and we're open to positive change. This is really the definition of continuous improvement. And this is really the only way to embrace all this change and to never stop learning and keep up with the velocity of change that is happening around us right now. So what I'd like to do in the last few minutes that we have together is invite you, if you'd like to just mime it with me, and I'm going to do a little bit of juggling and just have you sort of walk through the process, because it's so important, I believe, to internalize these principles physically. If you have any juggling balls sitting around or rolled up socks, grab them. But I'll just do a quick little demo to finish us off. And, as I said, we start off with 1 ball. We break it down and we focus on that peak. If you notice, I don't look down at my hands. I look at the top to see where the ball's going, and then my brain can do the work to help me to catch it. So it's so important to know where to focus and to focus on one thing at a time, even though there's a lot going on around us. And this can actually be very meditative. So I invite you to, after the call, go find some juggling balls and do this on your own if you're not joining in right now. But it can really be very meditative, and it's really a focused meditation, a moving meditation that can help you to regain some balance. When you take that second ball, now a lot of people want to do this. How many of you, be honest, have ever done this and say, look, I'm juggling? Well, this is kind of cheating because I'm handing one ball across. You see that? I'm just throwing one and handing the other one across. And what you need to be able to do is to throw both balls up into the air. Cross, cross, catch, catch. Now, a lot of people have great difficulty doing this because they're stuck, right? They're stuck in this pattern of doing this. And what's really interesting is as I'm teaching, a lot of the times I have to have people switch which hand they start with. So we all usually start with our dominant hand, and we fall into this pattern. If they switch and start with their less dominant hand, often they're more able to do that crossing pattern because they're a little less programmed. So it's a great lesson, to kind of reprogram ourselves and learn to look at the whole picture of what's going on and what might be causing certain things. When we take that third ball, and of course we're getting help, right? We're using both of our hands now. We're learning from the drops, and the process or the system, you can see I'm building that up, right? I do 2, cross, cross, catch, catch. I've built that process, and now there's a space where I can just simply add in that third ball, and I continue the same pattern: cross, 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 cross. So I'm going to end there with that. I want to, really just invite all of you to, I want to send you out knowing that you can really redefine what's possible, and just invite you to keep learning, to keep embracing that idea of continuous learning and improvement as we navigate this this new world together. So thanks, Dianne, for having me.
Jen, thanks so much, and thank you for bringing up the word nimble in your presentation, because we're all vulnerable, but that's what makes us human, and that's what gives us the greatest connections. So I want to thank you, everyone who's been online with us. I want to thank all the speakers today for not presenting, but for sharing who they are, their expertise, and for helping us maybe move forward one baby step. And I want to thank Jim Spellos. Jim, thank you as always for being there with me and for being the anchor to help this all happen. I couldn't do it without you. So I just want to, again, thank everybody. Bon Jovi said the other night, I think he actually wrote a song: if you can't do what you want, do what you can. So for the rest of the day, do what you can, all right? And let's all make a difference in somebody's life today so that we can make the world just that much better. Our next event is going to be on June 16th. It's on branding, and it's called What Story Are You Telling? And then on June 30th, we have an event on finance and wellness, because the two go hand in hand. In the meanwhile, this is Dianne Devitt. I leave you with this: just stand tall and take your own moment today. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Bye now.